September 2003, a small law office in Burlington, Vermont. Martha. She was 58 years old, a waitress at Murphy's Diner for the past 23 years. The lawyer across the desk had called her 3 days after Charles Bronson's death, saying she was named in his will. Martha assumed it was a mistake. She would serve Miss Bronson breakfast every Sunday for 2 decades, but they would never been friends. Just waitress and customer, polite exchanges, nothing more. The lawyer opened a manila folder and began reading. By the time he finished, Martha was crying so hard she could not speak. Because Charles Bronson, the man who would order the same meal every Sunday for 20 years and never asked for anything except coffee refills, had just changed her entire life. This is the story of what happened when a Hollywood legend noticed someone everyone else ignored, and why sometimes the smallest acts of attention become the greatest acts of love. Martha Chen came to Vermont in 1978. She was 33 years old, recently divorced, with a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie. The divorce had been brutal. Her ex-husband had emptied their bank account and disappeared, leaving Martha with nothing but debt and a child to raise. She would grown up in Boston, worked as a secretary, never imagined she would end up as a single mother, starting over in a small Vermont town. But sometimes life does not ask what you imagined. It just happens. Murphy's Diner was a classic American establishment, small, family-owned, the kind of place where locals ate breakfast every morning and tourists stopped for pancakes on their way to ski resorts. The pay was modest, but Martha needed any job she could get. The owner, Frank Murphy, hired her despite her lack of experience. "You will learn," he said. "Everyone does." Martha learned fast. How to balance 4 plates on one arm, how to remember orders without writing them down, how to smile at customers even when her feet ached and her daughter was homesick and the bills were piling up. The work was hard, but Martha was good at it. She had a gift for making people feel seen. She remembered regulars' names, their usual orders, small details about their lives. It was not calculated. Martha genuinely cared about people, and in a profession where most customers treated waitresses as invisible, Martha's kindness stood out. Regulars requested her section. Tips improved. Frank Murphy noticed and gave her the weekend morning shifts, the busiest and most lucrative. Charles Bronson first appeared at Murphy's Diner in early 2009. Martha was working a Sunday morning shift when a man walked in alone, took a corner booth, and opened a newspaper. She did not recognize him at first. He was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, a baseball cap pulled low. He looked like any other Vermont local. Martha brought him coffee and a menu. "Morning. What can I get you?" The man looked up, and Martha saw his face. Even with the cap, those features were unmistakable. Charles Bronson, the actor, Death Wish, the Magnificent Seven, sitting in her diner. Martha tried to stay professional, but her hands shook slightly as she poured his coffee. "Take your time with the menu, Mr. Bronson." He looked surprised that she recognized him. "You know who I am?" "Yes, sir. My daughter loves your movies." Charles smiled slightly. "How old is your daughter?" 6. "She is watching Death Wish at 6 years old?" Martha laughed nervously. No. "The Magnificent Seven. She loves Westerns." Charles nodded approvingly. "Good choice. Better for kids than my newer stuff." He ordered scrambled eggs, wheat toast, bacon, orange juice. Simple breakfast. Martha brought his food and left him alone with his newspaper. When he finished and paid, he left a $20 bill for a $7 meal. Martha tried to give him change, but he waved her off. "Keep it, for your daughter." That was their first interaction. Polite, brief, forgettable, except for the generous tip. Martha assumed she would never see him again. She was wrong. The next Sunday, Charles Bronson returned. Same corner booth, same order, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, bacon, orange juice, coffee. Martha served him, exchanged pleasantries. He left another generous tip. This pattern continued, week after week, month after month, year after year. Every Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. Charles Bronson would walk into Murphy's diner, sit in the corner booth, order the same breakfast, rate his newspaper, and leave. And every Sunday Martha would serve him. Over time, their brief exchanges evolved into something resembling friendship, though Martha would never have presumed to call it that. Charles would ask how Sophie was doing in school. Martha would ask how his latest film was coming along. They would talk about Vermont weather, local news, nothing deep or personal. Just the comfortable small talk between two people who saw each other regularly. What Martha did not realize was that Charles was paying attention in ways she could not see. He noticed when Martha looked more tired than usual. He noticed when she wore the same shoes for months because she could not afford new ones. He noticed when she started working double shifts and mentioned Sophie needed braces. He noticed when she brought her own lunch from home instead of eating at the diner because every dollar mattered. Charles Bronson, who had spent his entire life observing people, who would learn to see truth beneath performance, saw Martha Chen completely. And what he saw was a woman fighting every day to give her daughter a better life. In 1985, Sophie was 13 and wanted to go to summer music camp. The cost was $500, which might as well have been $5,000 for Martha's budget. She told Sophie they could not afford it this year, maybe next year. Sophie pretended it was fine, but Martha saw the disappointment. The next Sunday, when Charles paid his bill, there was an envelope under his plate. Martha opened it after he left. Inside was $500 in cash and a note for Sophie's summer camp. Do not argue, just say yes to her dreams. Martha ran outside, but Charles was already driving away. She stood in the parking lot, holding the envelope, crying, not just because of the money, though that was overwhelming, but because someone had noticed, someone had cared. In a life where Martha felt invisible, grinding through each day just to survive, someone had seen her. The next Sunday, Martha tried to thank Charles. Mr. Bronson, I cannot accept. He cut her off. You already did. How is Sophie? She is so excited. She leaves for camp next week. Good. That is what matters. And that was the end of the discussion. This pattern repeated over the years. Charles never made a big production of helping, but when Martha mentioned Sophie needed a winter coat, an envelope would appear. When Martha's car broke down and she mentioned walking to work, Charles casually said his mechanic owed him a favor. The car got fixed. No bill arrived. When Sophie was applying to colleges and stressed about tuition, Charles asked what schools she was considering. 2 months later, Martha received an anonymous scholarship notification. Sophie had received a 4-year scholarship to Boston University. The donor was listed as confidential. Martha suspected, but never knew for certain, and Charles never confirmed. They maintained their Sunday morning routine. He would arrive at 8:30 a.m., order the same breakfast, rate his paper, ask about Sophie, leave, generous tip, 20 years of Sundays, 20 years of scrambled eggs and small talk, and quiet kindness that Martha knew was extraordinary, but never fully understood the depth of. In 2000, when Sophie graduated from Boston University with a degree in music education, Martha invited Charles to the ceremony. It was the first time she would ever ask him for anything personal. Charles seemed surprised and touched. I would be honored, he said. He sat in the back row during graduation, wearing a suit that looked uncomfortable on him. When Sophie's name was called and she walked across the stage, Charles applauded harder than anyone. After the ceremony, Martha introduced them properly. Sophie hugged Charles and said, "Thank you for everything you did for my mom. She told me about the summer camp and the car and everything." Charles looked at Martha with mock sternness. "You are not supposed to tell." Martha smiled through tears. She deserved to know who her guardian angel was. The last time Martha saw Charles Bronson was Sunday, August 24th, 2003. He came to Murphy's diner as usual, but he looked frailer than she would ever seen him. His breathing was labored. His hands shook slightly as he held his coffee cup. Martha asked if it was okay. "Just old age catching up," Charles said. "Happens to everyone eventually." They talked about Sophie, who was now teaching music at a middle school in Boston. Charles seemed happy hearing about her success. When he left that morning, he hugged Martha. It was the first physical contact they would had beyond handshakes in 20 years. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For letting me be part of your family, even if just on Sundays." Martha did not understand what he meant. A week later, Charles Bronson was dead. The call from the lawyer came 3 days after Charles's death. Martha assumed it was a condolence call or perhaps notification about the funeral. She never imagined she was in his will. The lawyer's office was formal and intimidating. Martha felt out of place in her waitress uniform, having come directly from her morning shift. The lawyer was professional but kind. He explained that Charles Bronson's will contained several personal bequests, separate from his family inheritance. Martha was one of those recipients. "Bronson left you ownership of a house," the lawyer said. Martha did not understand. "I am sorry." "What?" The lawyer showed her documents. A 3-bedroom house in Burlington, Vermont, 2 acres of land, fully paid off. Deed in Martha Chen's name. The house had been purchased by Charles in 1995 and held in trust until his death. Market value, approximately $400,000. Martha stared at the papers, unable to process what she was seeing. "There must be a mistake. I was his waitress." "Mr. Bronson was very clear in his instructions," the lawyer said. He pulled out a handwritten letter. He asked that this be read to you. The lawyer began reading Charles's words. "Martha, by the time you hear this, I will be gone. I am not good at expressing feelings face to face, so I am doing it this way. For 20 years, you served me breakfast every Sunday. You never asked for anything except to do your job well. You never treated me like a celebrity or tried to get something from me. You were just kind, because that is who you are. I watched you raise Sophie alone. I watched you work double shifts and wear shoes with holes and never complain. I watched you sacrifice everything to give your daughter opportunities you never had. You reminded me of my own mother, who worked herself to death, trying to feed 15 children. I could not help her, but I could help you. The money I gave over the years was of nothing compared to what you gave me. Proof that good people still exist. This house is my thank you. Not for the eggs and coffee, but for making every Sunday morning the best part of my week. You never treated me like I was special. That made me feel more special than any movie premiere ever did. Live in this house. Retire from the diner if you want, or do not, but know that you earned this through 2 decades of kindness and dignity. You showed me what real strength looks like. It is not shooting guns on screen. It is raising a daughter alone, while serving eggs to strangers with a smile. Thank you, Martha. Thank you for everything. Charles." Martha sobbed so hard she could not breathe. The lawyer quietly left the room to give her privacy. When she finally composed herself, she asked to see the house. The lawyer drove her there. It was beautiful. White siding, front porch, large windows, the kind of house Martha had dreamed of, but never imagined owning. Inside, it was furnished simply, but comfortably. On the kitchen table was another envelope with Martha's name. Inside was a letter to Sophie and a check for $50,000 with a note for Sophie's future, start a music school, or whatever dream comes next. Charles. Martha moved into the house a month later. She did not retire from Murphy's Diner, though she cut her hours. The diner had been her life for 23 years. It is where she would met Charles. It felt wrong to leave completely. Every Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m., she would look at the corner booth and remember. Sometimes she would pour an extra cup of coffee and set it at Charles's spot. Small ritual, a way of saying he was still there. The story of Charles Bronson's gift to his waitress spread through Vermont and eventually reached national media. People were amazed that a Hollywood star had been so generous to someone who was not family or famous. But those who knew Charles were not surprised. He would grown up with nothing. He understood what struggle looked like, and he never forgot where he came from. In 2004, a year after Charles's death, a documentary crew interviewed Martha about her relationship with Charles Bronson. She was asked why she thought he would be so generous to her specifically. Martha thought for a long time before answering. I think Charles spent his whole life being seen as a tough guy, the action hero, the man who never showed weakness. But underneath, he was just a person who would survived hard things and wanted to help others survive too. He saw me struggling and remembered what that felt like. The money and the house, those were generous, but the real gift was that he noticed me. In a world where waitresses are invisible, Charles Bronson saw me, and that changed everything. Disclaimer: this story is a dramatization inspired by accounts of Charles Bronson's generosity. While Bronson was known for his kindness to service workers and charitable acts, this specific narrative is fictionalized to illustrate his character.